Good morning. I'm Tamara Shoemaker. When my kids were still in the toddler stage, my husband and I were on the cradle roll at church, where every few Sundays it was our turn to spend the whole Sunday morning in the nursery wing, and we would take care of the children that other parents brought back to, leave with us during church. In Sunday school. So we had cribs and we had diapers and we had toys and rockers and swings and snacks and all the elements usually needed to create happy children, right? And most of the time we were able to make it through those 2.5 hours of church and Sunday school with those happy children who were occasionally sleeping children or, snacking children or playing children. But every now and then a parent would bring in a child who just refused to let them go. And most of you who have been parents know what I'm talking about. It's that heart-wrenching disentanglement that happens as you hand off your child, right, to the babysitter or to the nursery worker or to the person in charge. And then you sneak out of the room when your kid isn't looking, and either you run away, which I did sometimes, or you just kind of sit around the corner and listen to those ear-piercing shrieks as soon as they discover you're gone. And either way, it's heart-wrenching. But some of you all have had kids who adjusted right away to playtime in the church nursery, and that's awesome. And I wish that we had, had that happen with us. Others, like us, spent most of our Sundays back in the nursery for years because of the separation anxiety that happened. Anyway, I'm getting off point. So one Sunday, it was our turn. My husband and I were to be in the nursery that Sunday. And so we had a child come in who had attachment anxiety. And so the parent who left the child with us stayed in there a little while longer before sneaking out. And then she took a church pager with her in case of emergencies. And I dedicated myself to helping this, poor crying child make it through the next couple of hours. So we rocked and I sang and I danced and I made funny faces and strange noises I don't think I've ever heard myself make before. And I pulled out the magical snack puffs, half of which ended up on this child's tear-streaked cheeks. Poor thing. And it took a while, but the kid eventually calmed down, right? Now and then she'd get kind of teary and we'd start the tactics all over again. I'd bring out a new distraction or a new toy, sing a new song, do a new dance, make some new strange noises. And she clung to me because I had become her temporary security. I was her port in the storm. So in mommy's absence, she wanted me. I was the only one who would do. And I thought, we can do this. She's going to make it. It's amazing how you kind of lose sight of the end goal, the fact that church nursery doesn't last for an eternity, but actually is only a couple of hours when you have a distressed child. But there was victory the moment the child squirmed off my hips and decided to pick up a toy without my help. And there was another small victory when the child held up the toy for my inspection and we played with it together. We were becoming buddies, right? I was the proud babysitter. My husband, he couldn't come near her or any of the other church nursery workers. It was she and I. We were a team. We were two peas in a pod. We were Thelma and Louise. We were Lucy and Ethel. And then the parent returned and church was over and it was time to go home. And the kid flew right past me with a shriek of delight. And I was relegated to stranger and alien once again. I no longer mattered. The real deal was there and a sit-in substitute was no longer needed. So obviously I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek there, but the scenario was what came to mind when I was reading in James 3, chapter 3, verses 13 to 18 this morning. And James starts out by asking, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done, and the humility that comes from wisdom." So first things first, James is asking a question, right? So what happens when someone asks a question? You expect an answer, right? So as a teacher, when I ask my class a question, I love to see raised hands. It makes me feel like there's actually brain growth happening, some stimulus. And the moment any person dreads who has ever spoken in front of a crowd is that moment of no engagement. So have you ever been in a setting where a stand-up comedian tells a joke to a silent audience? I have, and it's really awful. Poor man. There were a couple of sympathy laughs in the setting that I was in, but you could just see the man almost melt in front of our eyes. He was so embarrassed, and I was so embarrassed for him. But anyway, so we've established that if James is asking a question, he's expecting an answer. Who is wise and understanding among you? So pressure's on. Raise your hand. James interrupts. Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. In other words, stop talking, start walking. Stop saying what is good and wise and fruitful and start showing us those things. So then James sets up a contrast in these few verses between two specific kinds of wisdom. He says, earthly wisdom and heavenly wisdom. So if I were a teacher, hey, I'd set up a T-chart, but we'd have my students fill it in. So I'd say, class, what's earthly wisdom? Who can give me some adjectives? James, I see you. And James says, but if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. That's from James chapter 3, verses 14 to 16. Why, thank you, James, you say, and you turn and write on one side of the T-chart, earthly wisdom, unspiritual wisdom, wisdom from the devil. All right, class, that's one kind of wisdom. What goes on the other side of the T-chart? What is heavenly wisdom? And James still doesn't sit still. He's bouncing in his seat. And you sigh, yes, James. He says, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, without fault, without scar. Great, thanks. Then peace-loving. Okay, that's great. That's a good. Considerate. Okay, yep, you've got some. Submissive. I can see that. So full of mercy and good fruit. Good, good, good. Impartial. Thank you, James. Impartiality is sincere. You sigh. Is that it, James? James smiles. Peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. So you turn and add to the other side of the T-chart. Pure, you underline it because it's first of all. Then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial, sincere. Stepping back, let's eye the chart, right? Somehow there's something still missing. It seems pretty all-encompassing, right? On the one side, you've got wisdom that comes from sin. On the other side, you've got wisdom from heaven. The wisdom that comes from sin is pretty well described in Ecclesiastes, who tells us, the writer of Ecclesiastes tells us, that this type of wisdom is meaningless. It's a chasing after the wind. Excuse me. He says, then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also to madness and folly. But I learned that this, too, is a chasing after the wind, for which with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. That's Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 17 to 18. So in other words, nothing on that first side of the chart that we filled in is going to satisfy the deepest longings of our heart, right? Ever tried to chase the wind? Besides being unable to see where it goes, there's no substance to it. No amount of reaching or scooping or grabbing or trying will bring that wind into our grasp, right? But even on the other side of the chart, that there seems to still be something missing. You've got all the elements of godly wisdom. They're listed right there, and they're each important, even essential, right? To have wisdom for wisdom's sake. But what is the missing factor? So I flipped to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 23 and 24, which says, but we, he's talking about the apostles, but we, the apostles, preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, we the apostles, preach Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. And that kind of blew me away. Jesus Christ is the wisdom of God. So here's the thing. We can chase all day after wisdom, right? We can chase the earthly wisdom over here on this side of the T-chart, which is unspiritual and of the devil, or we could chase heavenly wisdom. But both sides of that T-chart are outgrowths of the person or the being behind the elements. Okay, so if you get the flu, right? You exhibit stuffy nose, maybe cough, maybe fever. The stuffy nose, the cough, and the fever are not the flu. They're symptoms of the flu. If you start dating, you might end up with flowers and chocolates and thoughtful gifts from the special new person in your life, right? But the flowers and the chocolates and the thoughtful gifts are great, but they're the symptoms of this relationship that you've begun. They're not the relationship itself, unless it's chocolate. You might have a relationship with chocolate. Similarly, the one side of that T-chart points to the person behind it, right? In this case, it would be the devil. The other side of that T-chart points to the other person behind it, in this case, Christ, who is the power of God, and he is the wisdom of God. So breaking it down, if we have Christ, we have wisdom because he is wisdom. It's not just enough to find wisdom, we lean towards that wisdom with longing. Paul says, brothers, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards, but God chose the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. A king born in a manger in a stable in rickety Bethlehem instead of the palace in the capital city. A rabbi who ate with tax collectors and sinners. A healer who touched the demon-possessed and the lepers and made them whole and clean. A teacher who told a woman caught in adultery that her sins were forgiven. He chose the foolish things of this world to shame the wise because he is wisdom. It is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us the wisdom of God, the wisdom from God. So, it takes a mind willing to be turned inside out and upside down to accept this wisdom. He is the author of the upside down kingdom. And it's unsettling in some ways. But if that's the case, Lord, unsettle me. A.W. Tozer said something that struck home for me today. He said, the Bible is not an end in itself, but a means to bring men or women to an intimate and satisfying knowledge of God, that they may enter into him, that they may delight in his presence, may taste and know the inner sweetness of the very God himself in the core and the center of their hearts. Y'all, I love the scriptures. Not because I love reading old passages that have been around for centuries, but because the scriptures are an arrow that points to Christ, that tells the story of God, that tells his love and his redemption and how he touches sinners lost in the depths of their blindness and he pulls them into his eternal light. John 1:1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word is not a set of 66 books, The Word is Jesus Christ, about whom those 66 books were written. And that's why I so love the scriptures, because they allow me to sit at Jesus' feet and learn him, learn his wisdom. Psalm 63:8 says, my soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. The American Standard Version says, and I like this better, my soul follows hard after you. Your right hand upholds me. So that's a reciprocal relationship, right? Where my soul clings to Jesus and Jesus' right hand upholds me, where we sit at Jesus' feet and worship him and learn from him and follow hard after him, and he turns around and holds us up, sustains us, encourages us, and loves us. So what's wisdom? Wisdom is the one who is on the other side of that relationship. Out of him comes all the symptoms on the one side of the chart that James gives us. So don't pursue purity for the sake of purity, or peace for the sake of peace. Don't seek out submissiveness or mercy or good fruit or consideration or impartiality or sincerity for the sake of themselves. Look for the person behind them. All else will follow. So my toddler friend looked past me and saw her parent, and boy, did she ever follow hard after mommy. Once she was in her mother's arms, all the world was right again. No more tears, all the toys in the world to show off. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, and out of that, everything else fell into place. All right, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.